Now let's bring in Elaine Donnelly, president of the Center for Military Readiness. She is against repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Elaine, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Actually, I support the actual law that Congress passed. We've never supported Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the administrative policy. It's very, very important to understand the difference.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you believe it is time to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the policy could have been eliminated a long time ago. It was never put in law by Congress. But there is no good time to repeal the law that Congress actually passed. You know, it's really amazing to see the Secretary of Defense try to say, well, there's only a small risk. Would he say that, well, we're going to issue body armor, that 10% of the troops won't be adequately protected, but that's a small risk, we're going to do it anyway because of a political promise? I don't think so. I think the advocates of homosexuals in the military need to calm down. This report has lots of evidence in the pages of it that show problems, major problems would ensue. The members of the Senate are going to take this more seriously. Well, that is exactly the opposite of what
Secretary Gates had to say. He said initially, yes, there would be issues, but nothing long term. Do you not value the report itself? I mean, here you've got 69% of those. Let me put some numbers here. 69% say that they've worked with service members they believe to be gay. 92% have very good or no bad feelings about a coworker they believe served openly and who was gay.
Guess what? I'm surprised it wasn't 100%. The question is irrelevant. We all know and have family members who are gay. That is not the relevant question, which was not even asked.
The relevant question is about readiness, and you have to...
Should the law be repealed or retained? The question was not even asked. And I do want to address, though, what Secretary of Defense Gates said about it's better for Congress to do this than the courts. First of all, Congress needs to have adequate time to evaluate everything in the report, not just the headlines. And I think they will do that.
What is adequate
but secondly,
time? What do you define as adequate time?
Please let me explain why he is dead wrong about this situation caused by a federal judge in San Diego. That decision, where a federal judge decided to issue a worldwide order to the Department of Defense to stop enforcing this law, is under appeal. The Secretary of Defense, by rushing to try to implement a ruling that never should have happened, because a judge doesn't run the military, he created the problem in the first place. But here's what happens. If Congress repeals the law, all the appeals of that decision stop. And so that very problematic ruling becomes precedent in the Ninth Circuit.
Elaine,
that is exactly the opposite of what the Secretary of Defense says he wants to happen.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. The bottom line for this report, though, let's get back to the report, Elaine, because I specifically want to ask you about readiness. That was the concern of members of your organization and others. And now this report is out, quote, in the short-term repeal would bring some limited and isolated disruptions to unit cohesion and retention, but the disruption would not be widespread or long-lasting, and U.S. military members can adjust. This was supposed to be about readiness. Would this affect our men and women who serve this country? Would this affect their ability to fight for this country? And according to this report, 10 months in the making, perhaps not long enough for some, but others say we've been discussing this for a decade, 17 years, in fact, of Don't Ask, Don't Tell specifically. Is this not, when is the right time is my question.
It is all in the definitions. The survey that was done by the Pentagon did not define readiness, cohesion, and other important factors. If you have, say, 40% of the Marines who have a problem with this, if we lost even half of that, 20% of the Marines, in the advanced years of their career, 10 to 14 years, that is a readiness issue because it is an all-volunteer force. If people do not volunteer and if they do not complete their careers, then you have a huge readiness issue.
Let me ask
There's also this little problem of zero tolerance. That means that anyone who disagrees with this policy will have career penalties. So there will be thousands of people driven from the military involuntarily because they don't go along with this new policy. And I want to make one very important point. There is nothing in this report, and the Secretary of Defense has never made one positive statement that this would help the military in any way, shape, or form.
Well, let me ask you quickly, Elaine, I've got to interrupt you, but let's bring it to, I think some something a lot of people can identify with. Some of the same sentiments that are articulated about gays and lesbians were articulated about African Americans integrating in our armed services. Were articulated about women. Is there, to me, explain to the audience the difference in some of the hysteria we saw prior to 1948 when our armed services were integrated with African American men?
That's not the right word. The word was irrational prejudice, all right? The military, when they eliminated irrational prejudice, they did it for two reasons: because it was the right thing for the military, helpful to the military, and equal opportunity was the secondary purpose. But when you have separation of men and women in the military, we don't expect women to live with men 24/7, no separation, the way this report is recommending, all sexual groups put together, no separation. We don't expect women to put up with that. If we did, we would lose a lot of good women in the military, and here's the reason why. Separation of the sexes, people who are sexually attracted to each other, that is rational, and it's customary in the civilian world as well as in the military. So when people make up a theory and pretend that sexuality doesn't matter, it's really a very foolish assumption, and there's no way that so-called leadership or training, LGBT training in all of the schools and the war colleges and the service academies.
Elaine, let me get you to hang on. I've got to interrupt you because we have some other guests I want to bring in. And with me now are, I respectfully want you to continue, but I have to bring in our other guests. With me now are two men discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. David Hall is a former Air Force Staff Sergeant and is with the Service Members Legal Defense Network. Mike Almy is also a former Air Force Major. And I do not, and I'm being clear about this, want anyone to believe that we're being rude to Elaine. I want to get both sides of the conversation, and you both have patiently listened. David, let me get you to respond specifically to what Elaine has to say about this not being, if you will, normal to have gays and lesbians together in the sense of the armed services, that in her eyes, despite this report, this is still not acceptable.
Well, you know, we're never going to change Elaine Donnelly's mind, just like we're not going to change Senator McCain's. But, you know, 66,000 gays are already currently serving in the U.S. military, and there hasn't been a problem. Even when the judge made the ruling and there was a stay, you didn't see a problem happening. You know, you didn't see gays just flying out and people getting kicked out. The report shows that most people don't care about this issue. We need to move on. We've moved on. Let's get this repealed. This is a non-issue. Her organization is going to try to keep making this an issue, but you know what? The rest of the country has moved on. Let's tell the Senate, repeal it. Let's let our military go on with its life.
Mike, let me bring you in. David says it's time to move on, but obviously already the reaction from some Republicans within Congress, Elaine Donnelly's organization and others are ready to fight this. Despite the 10-month report, there's a call for more time. Do you believe that that is reasonable at this point?
I certainly don't. As you mentioned earlier, this law has been in effect for close to 18 years now. There have been numerous studies, both within the military as well as academia, which show that this just isn't an issue, that gays and lesbians can serve honestly and openly alongside their straight counterparts with very little disruption, if no disruption, to the military, to the operational effectiveness.
Perhaps more time, can you say if more time is needed to the concerns of Elaine Donnelly and others, should we allow for more time, more review?
I don't think so. Well, I'm not even sure why Elaine Donnelly's an expert on the military anyway. She's never served in the military. She's never been in harm's way. She's never been in combat. She's never led men and women in harm's way. I have done that. I served as an officer for 13 years. I served through 4 deployments to the Middle East. I saw one of my own troops get struck down by mortar attacks. What had a far negative, greater disruption to the unit, to the mission of my unit, my squadron, the readiness, was when I was fired. When my private emails were searched and seized in Iraq and used against me. That had a far negative disruption on my unit than what Elaine is talking about. If gays and lesbians were allowed to serve openly. The young men and women that are coming in the military today, fresh out of high school, fresh out of college, for lack of a better word, they're the Will and Grace generation. They have grown up with gays and lesbians in their high schools and their sports teams. There are so many that are serving openly in the military today, and it's just simply not an issue. I think this study, as well as this debate overall, highlights the generational issue. People of Senator McCain's generation, by and large, don't support this. There are some notable exceptions. my father being one of them, who's a retired officer and a peer of Senator McCain's in that sense.
I've got to bounce two numbers off the two of you. 48% of the soldiers in Army combat arms units said that this would have a negative impact. 58% Marines in combat arms units said a negative impact of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. These are combat soldiers and Marines. How do you respond to at least those concerns from them?
Sure. My response to that is by and large, it's probably a fear of the unknown. I think it's a fear of what may happen next. As Secretary Gates and Admiral Mullen stated in their comments earlier today, it all boils down to strong leadership. The men and women in the military today need strong leadership, and this is no different. If our allies that have tackled this policy, Great Britain, Canada, Israel, Australia, most of Europe, have dealt with this issue, and it has just been a non-issue for them. It's been a positive impact on their military. Strong leadership is the key, and those that are holding back on this, I think, are reticent because they just don't know what's going to happen next. And I think that's understandable. And certainly, I think with strong leadership, that will mitigate, nearly completely minimize those risks.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. And as promised, I do want to bring back Elaine Donnelly, the president of the Center for Military Readiness. And Elaine, what do you believe needs to happen next? What do you expect from Republican
I just have to
lawmakers?
comment.
Go ahead.
I have to comment.
Sure.
It's just I cannot miss this opportunity to say the military is not a will and grace world. Yes, there are differences in generations, but there's a reason why 3- and 4-star generals and experienced people have a view different than what Mike has just expressed. There is nothing beneficial in this repeal that would help the military in any way. There are numerous problems that really cannot be resolved because human sexuality is a powerful force. Everyone knows that. You can't pretend that leadership alone and having LGBT training classes in the military mandatory, that would make a difference. And oh, by the way, he stopped just short of saying a rather derogatory phrase because he thinks anyone who disagrees with his view should be forced out of the military.
Elaine, I'd like to move the conversation forward if we can, and by doing so, I'm asking you, will your organization now pressure Republicans in the Senate to continue to fight the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell? Let's move this forward.
The responsibility is on the responsibility to make a case is on those who are advocating radical change. They have failed to make their case. If 48 or 58, whatever % of Marines say they have a problem with this, why would the military want to impose that kind of a totally unnecessary burden on the men who are out there serving? And I will say this, as a civilian, I have an advantage because I can speak freely. People in the military cannot. They were not even asked the question on the surveys that were put out by the Department of Defense. Do you think this law should be retained or repealed? I received many messages from troops who were so frustrated by this. They wanted to show support for the law, and they were told, sorry, we're not interested in hearing your views. Now, the Secretary of Defense cannot have it both ways. He can't say, well, we didn't ask for people's opinion, but the review shows that the military is okay with this. Sorry, Mr. Secretary, you can't have it both ways.
Elaine, we greatly appreciate you joining us. In the end, though, according to Defense Secretary Robert Gates and Chairman Admiral Mike Mullen, they do not believe that there will be a long-term or lasting impact on the U.S. military members if Don't Ask, Don't Tell is repealed. Thank you so much to our panel. We greatly appreciate it. We're going to go to a break. We'll be right back.
I strongly urge the Senate to pass this legislation and send it to the President for signature before the end of this year.